Night Shift Scary Confessions. Confession 1. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night, we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night, uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going in to work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute, and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did at that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the a.m., my roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired. No one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had. No known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened at that time. Confession 2. You know, I wish I would have thought of this a couple years ago. I have a 5-hour drive from my hometown to my job. I work 2 16-hour shifts. Then I have 4 days off. If I got tired, as I'd be leaving work at 11:30 p.m., I'd stop and leave a note on my window saying I'm just napping. I'm okay. I've had people pounding on my car window thinking I was overdosing or dead. I'm just tired and a heavy sleeper, and set my alarm for 20 minutes. One night, after hitting a gas station in my first leg, Binghamton, New York, I made such a stop. It was about 100A or so. I parked off to the side, put up my note, reclined my seat. Next thing I know, I'm on a backcountry road and there are some houses, but no traffic. I'm at a dead stop in the middle of this road. It's light out. I grab my phone and it's 6:30 a.m. and I barely have service. I opened up maps and plugged in my mom's address and followed the course. Thankfully, it had enough service to upload. I was 20 minutes away from a small town called Harpsville, and I got on the highway there, and I think it was another 20 from my initial starting point. So, between 1 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., I have no idea where I drove, if I was driving that whole time, how I didn't hit anything or anyone, how no cops or even just other drivers didn't see me. Maybe I was driving fine enough. I'll never know. The whole incident was beyond terrifying. I wish I'd thought to look at my location services to see where I was that night. Confession 3. When we first moved out to where we live now, 22 years ago, I would lose time intermittently. Never 7 hours like you, but like a good half hour or so. Getting to the nearest highway from our house used to take no more than 5 minutes. The main road we lived off of was a country road. Little traveled, no lights or stop signs, and speed limit is 45 miles per hour. People in the area were always barreling through at 60 miles per hour or more, though. Commute to work was roughly 30 minutes if there was traffic, 20 minutes without. I needed to be at the office by 8, so I would leave by 7 every morning to give myself a nice cushion. Yet somehow, some days, I would get there right at 8 a.m. It was baffling. I mentioned it to my husband, and he said I must have left later than I meant to, or that traffic was slower than usual, and I just hadn't noticed, etc., but it was frustrating to me. I tried to pay better attention to the exact time that I left the house, even jotting it down in my vehicle maintenance log that my husband kept in the center console. I began to notice that I would reach the highway a full 20 to 25 minutes after I'd left the house. A 2-mile segment that should only take me about 5 minutes was somehow turning into almost half an hour time frame. I couldn't explain it, and it didn't happen all the time, just enough that it became noticeable. Then my husband, who worked the night shift, also began to realize that something similar seemed to be happening to him. He would leave work at 3:30 a.m. and had a 45 minutes commute, but would sometimes find himself pulling into our driveway at nearly 4:45. Sometimes he called me on his way home because he felt drowsy, and I would keep him company by chit-chatting until he got home. Even so, somehow he wasn't getting home till later than the 45 minutes usual commute. It was unusual and unsettling enough that we started to get onto the highway by taking the roundabout route, which would tack on about 5 minutes to the normal 5-minute commute time from home to the highway. The lost time episode stopped. Over time, we went back to using the regular, shorter route and haven't since experienced any issues. However, it should be noted that what was once a little traveled, tree-lined country road has since become annoyingly congested with traffic due to all the new neighborhoods in the area. The trees that lined the road were razed to the ground. New houses, shopping centers, and schools have sprouted where the trees used to be, and the 5-minute ride from our house to the highway can sometimes take as long as 20 minutes due to the traffic and new lights. So, were our little lost time episodes a portent of the longer commute times to come? We sometimes wonder. Confession 4. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we were behind an SUV on the road. We were behind them for a good while when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavily. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the SUV called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said the highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later, I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. Edit. Wandered, not wondered. Confession 5. Once I was working in a restaurant and got done at around 12-ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along a bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight, but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of it lit up by streetlights, so without my front bicycle light, I would be totally blind for the most part. So this one night, I leave home after the shift and I notice a guy is biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy, but very safe city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exit, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of the night is getting to me. So I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minutes away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood and he's still behind me. What I then did as I noticed I was heading straight for a long, small, dark path, only for bicycles, I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard this person pass the house and brake quickly in that small path. At this moment, my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike, and when I passed the edge of that street, I stopped and stared that person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hope he thought, cause I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast, then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. Edit. I'm an average-sized girl and in my early 20s when this happened. TLDR. Bicycled home after a late shift in the dark and someone was clearly following me, was able to hide and get away. Confession 6. I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed an annotation that said, "Native villages reported in the area." There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much more of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back into the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat on the bridge with the door open because I liked the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing lights splashing in the water and went out to sea because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside, but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went into the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people canoe and all just sit and watch us, occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I have never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deckhand up and we both just walked around the decks to show that people were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night, completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning they came in and traded with us and were very friendly and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. Confession 7. I worked at a movie theater and most often worked the closing shift. One night me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my coworker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me and the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later, one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I Asked her what she meant, and she asked me why we had dumped all of the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved, and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all of the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place too. Confession 8. Salvadoran guy here. About a year ago, I moved to the capital city alone to study, and I met some friends in the first months here. I went to the beach about 3 or 4 times before this incident. I'll give you context. I have a 2011 Corolla, which isn't a fast car, and sometimes I get stranded in the street. The beach is like 20 miles away. The highway isn't in the best condition, but even with this country being as dangerous as it is, this road is really safe. Well, we packed our things and got on the road. It was about half of the way, 10:30 p.m., and I saw a car next to the road, which may have had a flat tire. I think twice before helping, because vehicle theft is known in this way, but I helped them. I stopped and saw this bearded fat guy, about 30 or 35 years old. He is obviously drunk, and he tells me that he has a flat tire that he cannot change it by himself. He tells me his friends do not know that he left the beach. He needs to go home, and that his spare tire is in the back of the car. He accompanies me to open it, and before I know it, he hits me very hard on the head. The blow pushes me towards the street, and another man appears out of the bushes with a naked torso and a machete. I move around the car and quickly analyze the situation. None of my friends know that I stopped on the street. My phone is in the car. I am completely incommunicado. Both men are very drunk, but I am afraid that they could still attack me as I am completely helpless. I start walking around the car, with them watching me and trying to surround me. When I have a clear view of my car and the bearded man is on that side, I run like a cheetah towards me and start it as fast as I can to shoot off down the road. I hear a shot, but I have no intention of looking back. I called the police, and as expected, they just told me not to walk through the area at that time because there were similar calls that week. I didn't travel alone in that area again, but unfortunately, I can't stop helping good travelers. Confession 9. I'm a little late to the party, but this one filled my nightmares for a long time after it happened. A couple years ago, I was living in Colombo, Sri Lanka, at a small hostel on the outskirts of the city. The hostel catered to long-term guests, so I got to know everyone pretty well who lived there. There was a guy living with us. His name was Raj, and Raj was a middleman of sorts in the casinos. In Sri Lanka, the casinos are incredibly shady places full of Russian mobsters and other low-life criminals from China and India. The casinos are technically illegal, but they continue operation through bribery and government coercion. I went to one of them one time, and it was a surreal experience. Anyway, my friend Raj's job was to take online bets from Indian clients and make them physically in the casino. He was playing with their money and was simply the vessel to allow individuals to play from another location. He played in some high-stakes games and with a lot of money for some powerful people. Basically a recipe for disaster. One night, he fucked up big time. One of his clients managed to gain access to his online system and stole all of the money his clients had deposited to play with, a sum well over $50,000 US, which is a fortune in Sri Lanka. We only found out about the theft after Raj's disappearance. A note was left in his bed, very cryptic, saying, "Don't look for me," and "I'm leaving," among other things. Dude vanished overnight. We made a police report and waited to hear anything. After a few days, the police come back to visit, asking someone who knew Raj to join them. The locals in the hostel were afraid to go with the police, so I volunteered and was taken to their headquarters. They took me to the back, where I was shown photos of a body cut into pieces. It was Raj. He'd been cut apart and dumped into the sewer canal nearby by someone. They'd brought me there to identify the body. They never found who did it either, and the image of those photos had never really left me. I'll forever be haunted by it, and I left the hostel shortly afterwards. Poor guy was caught up in some shady stuff, but he didn't deserve that. Confession 10. I've posted about this before in another thread, but I feel it fits here. So this happened on my shift, graveyard. I was helping another short-staffed store across town. Had a woman come in. She seemed a little frazzled and is carrying a Bible, but otherwise she seems fine. She buys some chips, then starts talking to me about this crazy coronavirus stuff. Yada yada, then she tells me ate an evil spirit pretending to be a clove of garlic. I of course think she's just messing with me, but no, she pulls out a piece of garlic, lays it on the counter, and starts telling me it isn't garlic and is in fact a demon that wanted to possess her. She then starts asking me about if I believe in spirits or if I can see it, because despite looking like I'm one of the humans that's a third demon, I'm really a human who's a third angel who was sent to Earth to help her expel the evil spirits and urges she feels, and that it's okay if I didn't know it because she can see it, and she leaves the garlic on the counter and tells me that she'll wait for me to deal with it. Now that's pretty much where the original incident ended. A few days later, at about 2 a.m., maybe 2:15-ish on a Tuesday, I'm working the graveyard shift at my usual store when this woman pops up again. She proceeds to just buy some candy and sorta hang out asking me about jade, the jewelry type, and incense, and if we've met before. Nothing as weird as before. Now the weird thing is I didn't hear or see her come in before she approached the counter. We have a loud-ass siren thing that turns on when the doors are opened and only shuts off when they're closed, which is normally not a big deal, but considering I'd been stalking and cleaning in the front the whole time and had only gotten 2 or 3 customers beforehand, yeah, it was a bit weird. She hangs out a bit longer than rushes to the restroom and doesn't walk out of it till about 6. Says have a nice day and just walks out the store like nothing. Which freaks me the fuck out cause I cleaned the restrooms a little bit after she went in and she somehow had managed to slip out or hide somewhere when I went to clean them. Outside of hiding in the stalls, there is nowhere to hide in the restrooms and there's no windows to slip out of. And like a jackass, I looked up at the top of the stalls and at the ceiling thinking she had pulled a Spider-Man, but nope, she just poof. Disappeared then reappeared and left super casual a couple hours later. TLDR, customer told me she ate a demon trapped in garlic and I was half angel. Then a few nights later she shows up again, pulls a Houdini in the bathroom and randomly exits the restroom and leaves the store a couple hours later. Confession 11. I drive about 40 minutes out into the country every Saturday for band practice and am usually headed home about 1 to 2 a.m. The place we get together is not super remote, but it is all woods and farmland, and the road is basically empty that late at night. One night, I saw a set of luminous eyes right on the tree line on the opposite side of the road. I figured it was probably a deer because I see a handful of them every time I make the drive. Anyway, as soon as I saw the eyes, I started slowing down because deer are absolute idiots and will jump right into the path of your car with no warning, even if they see you coming from a long way off. As I was getting ready to pass by, I swear it looked like whatever it was stood up on its hind legs and ran into the woods. It moved quickly too, like a horizontal sprint, not like big vertical hops like deer do. It took me a really long time to reconcile what I'd seen. I kept telling myself, now dude, you were just tired. It was just a deer. But I've seen hundreds of deer and this thing was too tall, and it was too skinny to be a bear, and it moved too fast to be a person, not to mention the eyes. I still have trouble wrapping my head around what that might have been. Edit. I wanted to respond to some of the theories in the comments. Moose. This would be almost more disconcerting than seeing some monster or ghoul because I live about 800 miles away from the natural habitat of the moose. Bigfoot. I live on the opposite coast from where Bigfoot is usually spotted, but we did have a lady report a Bigfoot sighting in that area a few years earlier. She said she saw a Bigfoot and a Bigfoot baby. It made the news and everything. It was probably a black bear and a cub, but I wasn't there, so who knows. Skinwalker/Wendigo. This is the one that, terrifyingly, makes the most sense. I know that most Wendigo lore is from Native American legends, and the tribes who talk about them are usually located in the Midwest. I'm on the East Coast, so geographically it doesn't track, but the fact that I thought it was a deer before it stood up and ran off does track how Wendigo are described. SCP. I didn't know what this was, but I looked it up and now I'm scared to drive at night. Confession 12. I was camping in my car while on a drive up to see my family in Salt Lake. I was taking my time on what should have been about an 11-hour car drive with minimal stops. But this time I was on my own, so I was stopping to take in views and all that. I thought I was about 18 and not much money to my name, so instead of getting a pricey room for the night, I decided I'd just find a secluded place off the freeway in the desert. For anyone that's ever driven the route, it was about an hour past the racetrack, just outside of Las Vegas. It was one of those exits where there were just farm roads coming off it. So I assume I wasn't gonna be on anyone's land that would mind too much or ever check on me. I pulled off and parked up and sat on my tailgate enjoying my dinner of beef jerky and Arizona tea while listening to music. Just normal stuff. Out of nowhere, a fucking motorcycle flies past me. No lights, no nothing. It was going fast enough that it took me a solid 20 seconds to put it all together. Laughed and shook my head just thinking how dumb it was, but it's their life to do what they want. Not a minute later, too low, flying jets fly overhead. Top Gun style, curving mountains and battling valleys. It was a great show. Then 10 minutes later or so a convoy comes rolling down the road. I could hear it before I saw the lights. Now I grew up in the military, so I'm used to seeing this shit. But this felt different. Maybe it was just the series of events. Normally you see a convoy, you wave at me and let them go by. But it was nearly midnight, and something told me to just turn around and pretend I didn't see anything. A Humvee pulls up and basically blocks me from moving. My vehicle could hear doors open, but no one got out to come to me. I was leaning on my hood at this point. The car was off, all that. Didn't even turn to look at them. Keep my hands away from me and on the hood. I could feel them just looking at me. Convoy passes. The Humvee pulls out and goes on their way. I really think it was just a series of events. The jets were probably doing practice since the AFB is right next to LV. The motorcycle was just some dude taking advantage of empty roads, and the convoy was just out for some training like the jets. Confession 13. I had freshly turned 18 and was working a closing shift at a small cafe in a grocery store. One of my regular customers comes in, Tom. Tom was a hugger. He'd come in and call out, "Where's my girls?" And we'd all have to awkwardly hug this 80-year-old man while he whispered, "God bless you," in your ear. I hated Tom. He always held on a little too long and whispered a little too close. On this shift, I was closing alone and Tom came in at about 4 p.m. Not unusual. I dealt with the creepy and got him his coffee and bagel. He was with his wife this time. She was sweet but tired looking. He started asking me questions as I worked. What do I have to do at night? Is it hard closing alone? What time am I off? Do I ever get scared walking to my car in the dark? The questions got progressively more uncomfortable, and his wife just sat there silently. I answered as friendly as I could, despite the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I would catch him staring at me often. It was okay though, I was off work at 7, so it wasn't a big deal. Until he didn't leave. His wife went home without him, and he just stayed, staring, for hours. I asked if there was anything else he needed. He said no, I'm just waiting for you to get off of work. He wanted to walk me to my car, he said, because young girls shouldn't be in a dark parking lot alone. I told him it wasn't necessary and continued about my work, ignoring him now even as he stared. He left about 15 minutes before my shift ended, into the dark Michigan winter, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't think twice when I punched out and headed to my car. I grabbed my snow brush and began clearing my car, enjoying the quiet that's unique to a snowy night. I began to hear the crunching of footsteps behind me. I brushed it off. I am in a parking lot, after all. But they get closer, past any other car and directly towards my car, parked away from the others in employee parking. I look and it's Tom, maybe 50 feet away and smiling. He tells me that I should have looked for him. He had been sitting outside waiting for me, and I should know it's dangerous for young girls to be alone in a parking lot at night. I began shaking. I tried to open my car door, but it was frozen shut due to the earlier storm. Tom came closer, calling me a stupid girl and asking God to forgive him. I debated running back into the store. He was so old he surely couldn't keep up, right? I didn't want to change it, though. He could have been younger, as I'm a terrible judge of age, and I'm not exactly fast myself considering my weight. So I stand my ground. I fumble in my purse for my pepper spray, thankfully attached to my keys. I tell him to stay back, I have pepper spray, and to go home to his wife. He glowers at me. I show him the teal canister. We're about 15 feet apart now. He's well within range. He calls me a bitch, spits at me, and heads back into the store. I get in my half-uncovered car and drive home, terrified. I called the store when I got home, only a mile and a half away, so about 2 minutes, and told them what had happened. They kicked Tom out and told him not to come back. He began cursing up a storm, and his wife had to come pick him up. He ended up getting arrested for child pornography a couple years later, but I don't know the details as I had moved away at that point. Can't say I'm sad to see him go, though. Confession 14. Not exactly a lonely road, but I was speeding west on I-70 through Colorado near Glenwood Canyon when I decided to slow down and enjoy the view. I notice a state patrol car in front of me a minute later when he turns on his sirens, and I think he's got me busted for speeding. Instead, he's pulling to the shoulder up, ahead, to help a broken-down motorist. I slow down and remember looking at the motorist who is sitting in the driver's seat with their head down, thinking, man, that guy is lucky to get help out here, no cell coverage, etc. I keep driving west. A few minutes later, I start to notice police cars flying past me headed back east, sirens blaring, going extremely fast through a curvy canyon. One after another for like 15 minutes, ambulances, fire trucks. Seems like all emergency response in the country is headed back the direction I came from. The next day, I'm at a hotel in Utah and discover what happened. Turns out the broken-down motorist had skipped bail, and after being confronted by the state trooper who was there to offer assistance, exited his car and began shooting the officer in his back multiple times. On a normal day, the officer would have died as they typically drive alone, but on that day he was headed to training and had a partner in the car who emptied his clip and killed the motorist. Officer almost bled out on the road, but survived. Confession 15. Last year, I started working the graveyard shift at a newer hotel. It was built basically over the spare pasture for the farmer that still lives next door. One night, I'm doing my late shift thing, which was absolutely nothing, and I was standing at the front desk browsing the internet. The front door was perfectly visible from where I was standing, and I thought I saw a flash of white out of the corner of my eye that came from that direction. There's a lot of stray cats around here, so I didn't think anything of it at first, on top of the fact that I was half asleep and there was a good chance it wasn't anything anyway, until I noticed it a second time, but much slower. I looked up, and out of the sliding glass doors, I saw a giant white mass. If that was a cat, it was an absolute monstrosity. Nervously, I walked towards the door to investigate, not knowing what kind of sumo wrestling feline I was about to encounter. I finally am able to see out towards the street, and lo and behold, there were 4 horses loitering in front of our hotel. I failed to put 2 and 2 together at first and had no idea where they came from, and if you can believe it, the hotel didn't provide me with any horse handling training, so I had no idea what I could do. The hotel is right next to a busy highway, and even at 3 in the morning, I was worried about the horses wandering around unattended. I ended up calling the police, and after telling them where I was, I told them, verbatim, "I don't know how to explain this, but there are unattended horses outside." I didn't see anyone show up, but the horses were back in the pasture behind the hotel the next day, so everything must have sorted itself out well in the end. I know that wasn't very scary, but it was when I experienced it. 2 of my coworkers are convinced the hotel is haunted though. Maybe they've got some better stories. Confession 16. Not what I saw, but what I heard. I was on a solo motorcycle trip across the great USA, from New York to southern Florida, then straight across to Los Angeles. I crashed at 80 miles per hour, ran from a shooting in New Orleans, and a guy hyped up on crystal meth tried to fight me, but none beats the chill I felt deep in the woods of Louisiana. I camped at national parks 85% of the trip and loved meeting the people there. No real scary animal encounters, all was good. This particular day was Thanksgiving 2015. I came out of the local market with my dinner for the night and a little camp spot in mind. A father and his son saw me and my motorcycle, so they stopped by to chat. All was well, until he asked me where I was planning on staying that night. I told him. His face went white. He begged me not to go. I asked why. He said there's a group that practices dark arts in the woods around there, particularly during Thanksgiving. He said people have been known to go missing. Needless to say, I was freaked, but the night was coming fast and there weren't any nearby alternatives. I told him I would heed his advice, but ultimately, I went anyway. No one was at the camp spot, but there were a few RVs. I thought it was odd, but was happy for some peace and quiet. I made a fire, ate some turkey out of a bag, and tried to relax, but something about the place was off. I cannot explain it, but it was kind of like the feeling of being watched, coupled with the fact that these RVs seemed recently used and had stealable belongings hanging around. Motorcycling day in and day out takes a huge toll on your body. I was tired as hell, but that uneasy feeling was keeping me up. After a few hours, I decided I needed sleep or risk repercussions the next day. I let the fire die down and crawled into my tent. Just as I settled in, I heard it. A terrible guttural sound. It was unlike anything I've ever heard. An equal mix of a human scream and an animal dying. One dying scream, as it were. Just once. It felt close, but also far. Chills pulsated throughout my body, instantly activating my fight or flight. I jumped out of my tent and shined my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. I picked up a rock and slowly crept around, but once again, nothing. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink that night, but no one ever showed up. I can still hear that scream and feel those chills when I think about it. Confession 17. As a rule, I don't believe in ghosts or any other supernatural stuff, but I do have a ghost story of sorts. It isn't very dramatic, but at the time I was freaked the fuck out and more than a little confused. A few years ago, at Beverly Beach State Park in Newport, Oregon, I was walking with my dog along this trail that runs along a fairly large creek to the left and a fairly steep hill filled with brush to the right. I was pretty close to the campground. I could still see the RVs and tents through the trees on the other side of the creek. As I was walking along, I saw another kid about my age, 14-ish, and all by myself and feeling a bit lonely. I thought I'd approach him. About 50 feet away from him, though, my dog starts panic barking. I mean, freaking the fuck out. His hackles are raised, teeth bared, tail tucked, feet against the ground. Usually my dog is as friendly as he can be. I'd never seen him act this way before, and so I was stunned. I tug on his leash and with all my strength, but my dog doesn't want to take a step closer to this kid. Finally, I drag him past, giving the kid a wide berth, and manage to pull my dog around the kid and further along the trail. As I pass him by, I apologize for my dog's behavior, and the kid says nothing. He just stares at me, head slowly tracking us, almost like it would in a horror movie. As soon as the kid is out of sight, Doggo immediately relaxes, wagging his tail and happy as a clam at high tide. Baffling something in me forces me to turn around and walk back towards the kid, wondering what could have made my dog act like that. Yeah, I'd probably be the first to die in a horror movie. The kid's gone. I mean gone, and I have no idea where he could have gone where I wouldn't have seen/heard him. Even if he'd taken off at a dead sprint down the long straightaway and towards the next corner in the 30 seconds my back was turned, I feel like I would have seen him, and thanks to the creek/hillside surrounding us, there really was only one way to go. I suppose it's most likely that some shy kid terrified of dogs was equally scared shitless of me and my dog as we were of him, but everyone I tell this story to, that's the type to believe in ghosts, are absolutely certain this was dog sensing and evil spirit. Confession 18. A few years back, I shared a house in the suburbs with a couple of roommates. It was a planned development with lots of benefits like a community pool, park, garden, etc. The downside was the local bus stopped running at around 8 p.m. I worked graveyards and early shifts nearby. Not an issue. But my roommate, Luke, worked a night shift that only clocked off at around 10 p.m. Then he had to ride the city bus for an hour to get 10 miles out from where the house was. I told him if he covered some of my utilities, I'd pick him up in my car and save him the late night walk home from the city bus stop. This worked out great, and another roommate, Jen, started to join me for the ride or to go on a late night snack run. One night I was sleeping and woke up to the sound of Jen calling my name over and over, "Walkie, Walkie." I get up in a daze and think, damn, I fell asleep and missed Luke's text. Now we're late to pick him up. Jen's in the driveway under my window and still calling me, "Walkie, Walkie." I tell her I'm coming and she stops. I'm rushing now cause I have two roommates waiting on me, so I put on a jacket, go downstairs, grab the keys, slip on my shoes and open the garage, and see nothing in the driveway except my car. I'm confused, since there's no way Jen's 170 centimeters self is hiding behind our dying rose bush or my Toyota. I think about going out to look around for her, cause maybe she walked down the street a bit to smoke a cigarette since she knows I hate the smell, but I realize I forgot my phone. I close the garage and go back inside. Jen got outside without it open. She can get back in without it. As I rush upstairs to where all our rooms are, I realize the lights are on under Jen and Luke's rooms. They're both home. I get to my room, check my phone, and see that it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Luke doesn't work Sundays, and Jen was never outside calling my name. Confession 19. This was actually on a Danish highway with lots of traffic. I was riding my motorcycle and pulled over at a rest stop. The stop only had a parking lot and a toilet, no gas station or anything, and was hidden from view from the highway by trees. As I stopped, there was only one car in the parking lot. A man was standing next to it. He came over and I thought he was just a tiny bit strange. He told me he was a German chemistry professor, but did not look the type. He had been sleeping in the trunk of his station wagon, and when he left through the rear hatch, he had left the keys inside and the car was locked. He wanted to borrow my phone to call for assistance, and I let him use it. After the phone call, I was still talking to him and he told me about the trip he was on. I was more or less trying to end the conversation when a rundown van with graffiti on it stopped next to us. Out comes a man who looked a bit off, like a mix of an 80s denim jacket gang member and a drug dealer. He opened with, "How much is that motorcycle worth?" I found that slightly threatening. He kept on talking about how nice my bike was, as well as telling me his life story. He told me he was a West German truck driver in the 80s, driving a route to East Germany. He had an East German girlfriend who he met every time he was there, but they were discovered by Stasi, and he never saw her again. He was convinced she was killed by Stasi because of her relationship with him, West German. At that point, he had moved to Norway and worked there as a butcher for 10 years. But then some things happened in my life and I joined the Foreign Legion. Now, people don't just join the French Foreign Legion. The way he said it made me think he was saying that he did some serious crime, but escaped the police/prison by joining the Legion, which is apparently a thing. Now, at this point, I was 100% convinced he was bullshitting me. I just did not understand what he was trying to achieve. Did he want to steal my bike? Or my wallet phone? Meanwhile, the professor wanted to leave so bad, but he was still locked out of his car. Me and the crazy dude were speaking partly Danish/Norwegian, so he did not understand what we were talking about, but I guess you could say he understood enough to be a bit frightened. I wanted to pull on these crazy guys' strings a bit, so I asked him about something I'd heard about the Foreign Legion. That they give you a dog, and you have to care for the dog and have it as a pet, and then they make you kill it and eat it. He told me, nope, that's not true. It's a rabbit, not a dog. And then he kept talking about it in a way that was very, very convincing. And then he pulls the ace out of his sleeve. Literally. He pulls up his sleeve and reveals a tattoo of a legionnaire of the French Foreign Legion, in uniform, covering his whole arm from elbow to wrist. I mean, non-legionnaires don't have that. I was still trying to figure out what he wanted. He had still not asked what me and the professor were waiting for. But just then, a roadside assistance truck arrived to help the professor, and the crazy guy realized the situation. And then became annoyed because if he had known, he could have picked the car door lock in seconds. I have equipment for it in my car. Anyway, the professor and the crazy legionnaire became occupied with the locked car and the arrival of the roadside assistance truck. And I got on my bike and noped the fuck out of there. At the end of the day, I think he was genuinely a legionnaire, butcher, and truck driver. I think he was a lonely guy, just looking for conversation, but no longer used to civilian-friendly conversation. I'm sure he had hundreds of interesting stories to tell, but I would prefer to hear them in a less isolated place than a Danish rest stop. Confession 20. About 2 years ago, I was hiking at a local national forest by my hometown. My family had a get-together and been hiking there a few times, so we were kind of familiar with the area. I have geocached once there, so I was gonna try it again because it was a popular area for caching. I split off from my family and it was just me and my friend who I brought. We were both by this giant lake and off to the right we seen a faint, unmarked path. We decided to see if it led to anything cool, but about a couple 100 meters ahead, we smelt a horrible smell. We looked around being curious what was causing that god-awful smell. Then my friend pointed up to a limb of a tree to a hanging deer carcass, a split right through the stomach. The deer also looked a few days old. so it hadn't been there long. There was also a cloth doll nailed into the tree. It had been worn and made things worse. I had a horrible gut feeling and looked over at my friend and said, "Bro, let's get the fuck out of here." We got out of there faster than we came. It was almost like a ritual. We agreed to not tell anyone there with us about what we found. I haven't been to the place since, but I really hope no one else had stumbled upon what we found in the woods that day. Edit. We eventually told people, but we didn't tell anyone that was with us at the moment because we didn't want to freak anyone out with the creepy find. Confession 21. Graveyard shift worker at the time. Won't go into details, but I stopped a guy from holding me at gunpoint and taking my vehicle while I was pumping gas. Station was closed. It was 2 a.m. Streets were pitch black. Guy comes walking up out of nowhere. Ask where I'm headed, what time it was, etc. Just getting me to talk. Nothing alarming, except he's fidgety and has had his one hand in his front leather jacket pocket the whole time. I say if it was almost done pumping, decide if this was it, I'll make the best of it. Guy needs whatever it is more than I do. So I say, need a ride somewhere? Was home from work, but I've got a few dollars. We can stop for food because I'm hungry and don't mind having company. What's your name? Mine is Mary. I know that if you start getting personal with an attacker, it gets harder for them to hurt you. I was thinking, take me hostage, hold me at gunpoint point, yell in my face, I can take this. But please don't take my life and don't leave me 2 hours stranded away from home in the middle of the night. I got done pumping when I finished, giving him a short amount of time to think on his answer, and in his panic at me offering him the things he was going to take from me, he goes, "Nah, I'm just gonna walk. Thanks again." Leaves. I carry a taser now. Confession 22. When I was 18, my family and I took a vacation to Hawaii. My mother wanted to do the touristy thing and do the road to Hana. Normally you can take a tour bus up it, but that wasn't good enough for her. So we rented a car. The rental companies typically forbid driving that road because of liability issues. That didn't stop my mother. We had a normal drive up there, plenty to see. We spent all day exploring. So by the time everyone was exhausted, it was night. Now, we were a good ways away from the road down. Think back to the dirt roads of Maui. So what do? Go down some of the closed-off local roads. This one road, in particular, was a very narrow, winding road over the edge of the island. You couldn't even stop on the road to get out and pee. If you looked over the edge, there was a straight drop into the ocean. Anyhow, we were driving in the dead of the night, slowly, and we approached this weird bend that backs up to a heavily forested area, a small waterfall, and a cliff overhang just above us. My mother wanted to take some pictures of the moon, stars, and ocean because it was breathtaking with no city lights. So we pull off to the side of this road with just enough space to let another car pass you. I, of course, get out too. It was dead silent. Then all of a sudden, I hear what sounds like a crying baby, which was weird. We were in the middle of nowhere and hadn't seen anyone for hours. So I'm just standing there, confused, and it stops. I motion for my mother to come over and ask if she heard anything. She didn't. So we stand there for a little longer and it starts up again. Neither of us could pinpoint where it was coming from. Both of us were panicked because that's what baby crying does to most humans. We spent a good hour calling out and trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, it stopped. We returned back to the hotel and never heard anything about it. Confession 23. This isn't a late-night story or anything, but is one that still really creeps me out. Copied from another thread, but makes sense here as well. When I was younger, probably 13 or 14-ish, I was cycling up to a park near the local shops to meet some friends. It was one of the first times I had cycled such a long distance on my own, but I was always a pretty street-smart kid and I had a phone, so I didn't think much could go wrong. To get to this park, you have to use a pedestrian cut through that is pretty wide and you can see right the way through, but is enclosed by trees, so it is a bit dark. As I cycled through, a guy was standing to one side, pulling at a branch, but didn't think much of it. When I rode past, he lurched towards me and tried to stick the branch through my front tire to throw me off or something. Luckily, he missed, but he just stood there whilst I cycled as fast as I could to meet my friends. Once I got to the park, I told them about it and was pretty shaken up. As I was talking, one of my friends had obviously noticed someone staring at us and asked me what he was wearing, all blue tracksuit/kit of a local football team, and when I told her, she went kind of like that guy, gesturing behind me. And there he was, sat on the bench just staring at us. I freaked the fuck out and all of us ran to one of the girls' houses where my dad picked me up, put my bike in the car and drove me home. I'm pretty sure I saw him again a few years later, but to this day I have no clue how he managed to get to the park at roughly the same time as me, considering I was on a bike and he was walking. Still makes me feel uneasy. Confession 24. Once my friend and I were hiking on an overnight trip to the summit of this peak. In order to get from the campgrounds to the peak, you had to, unless you wanted to cross a deep river, walk across the mountain ridges and then descend into a valley in order to climb out of the valley onto another set of mountain ridges. It is impossible to reach the mountain in one day, so you have to find a place to camp for the night. In this area of Alaska, everywhere is tundra and mountains except for the valley between the two ridges. There is cover from the wind there, so we decided to set up camp there. It is important to note that the campground has the only road leading to civilization for miles. To come from any direction other than the one we came from would mean the nearest town is more than 100 miles away. Also important side note, when we arrived, we were the only people at the campground. It is late at night and we are trying to fall asleep when we hear footsteps approaching, slow human footsteps and a raspy breathing. It was human for sure, not animal. We were armed with a bolt-action rifle for protection from bears, so we asked who was out and there was no reply. We then heard them knock over our clothes drying rack. I was scared shitless and warned the person outside that we were armed. The footsteps suddenly picked up as the person ran past our tent opposite of the direction of the campgrounds. There was no shaking of a pack as they ran, which I found odd. It was a sleepless night, and when the sun shone on the valley, we exited our tent to find our clothes drying rack in tatters, and there were small footprints in the ground leading towards and away from our tent. We made it to the mountain and hightailed it back to the campground as fast as we could. I don't know who that was, but I didn't go camping for a while after that. Confession 25. I've posted this on Reddit a couple of times, but here it is again, just because it fits. Back in the early 90s, I worked for Domino's Pizza. When this happened, I was an assistant manager, but we had to deliver sometimes too. Tonight, just after 11 o'clock, I made a delivery to a house in one of our middle-income neighborhoods. I get to the house and there is not a light on. If the porch light wasn't on, we were supposed to go to a payphone and call the number on the order. That was to prevent robberies. I never did that. I would just go ahead and go to the door. But tonight, I sat in my car for a minute and I just had a gut feeling, and I always listen to my gut. So I drove back 2 blocks to a payphone and called the number. It was disconnected. I decided to wait just a minute before making the second call we were supposed to make. If they didn't answer the second time, we were supposed to go back to the store. As I stood there, I noticed a Pizza Hut drive-through, but really didn't think about it. You spot each other while on the road. I call back, still disconnected. For some reason, I decide to return to the house and just see if someone comes to the door. I get back and realize the Pizza Hut car is sitting in my driveway. I think, what the hell? I turn in the long driveway, which is lined on the left side by tall evergreen tree/shrub things. I immediately notice there is something big on the ground next to the open driver's door of the Pizza Hut car. I pull up behind him and park and realize that it's the driver. I decide he must have had a heart attack or something, so I run up to see what I can do to help. When I get to him, I realize his skull has been caved in so bad, I can actually see his brains. I run back to my car and lock the door. I drive like 90 miles per hour those 2 blocks to the payphone and call the cops. Then I call my store and tell them what is going on and have them call Pizza Hut. I wait for the cops to come through and I go back. Eventually, the detective comes over to talk to me. He tells me that first in the bushes next to the driveway, they found a realty sign. The power is off and the house is completely empty. They also found 2 sets of footprints in the bushes. It appears they ordered from both places and waited for whoever got there first to rob. I was first, but because I didn't get out of the car, they had to wait on Pizza Hut to show up. If only I got out of the car the first time, that would have been me laying on the ground dead. For some reason, a gut feeling perhaps, I did not do what I normally did. I never knocked on another door without the front porch light on, unless I knew the customer really well.